Get your hands on a Subway steak melt. Try the irresistible Big Philly cheesesteak or tender, juicy steak and cheese. And don't miss out on the unforgettable steak, bacon, egg, and cheese for breakfast. Subway steak melts. Melty goodness made irresistibly delicious. Subway. Eat fresh.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't
The
care.
BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now,
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report, a hazy Tuesday here in Southern California. We are going to talk hockey with the man of the Puck Daddy blog from Yahoo Sports, Greg Wyshynski. He is on the Subway Fresh Tech hotline right now. What's happening?
Oh, nothing much. Quiet week in the old National Hockey League. Really successful coaches getting fired, local heroes returning to Washington, that kind of thing.
It's really been a really action-packed season thus far, wouldn't you say?
Totally. I mean, stuff you couldn't imagine happening. Hasty firings of coaches, the entire Sidney Crosby revival, the teams that were supposed to be just absolutely terrible all of a sudden at the top of the conference. It's been pretty unpredictable. It's been pretty fun.
Well, let's go with the newsworthy stuff first. Ovechkin. The coach gets fired, Boudreau, who anybody who watched 24/7 last year had a soft spot for because he broke the F-bomb record on HBO, which really nobody thought could be broken. I liked him. I'm actually following regular season hockey for the first time in 18 years. And it was clear Ovechkin was kind of dogging it. Like it was one of the storylines of this season. Was it the coach's fault?
Well, I think it was the coach's fault in the sense that those two weren't getting along. And there's no question that when he's the captain, when he's the star, when he's making $9 million a year, and he's the reason a lot of those fannies are in the seats in D.C., that the team takes he's the catalyst for the team, you know? And when he's sulking, when he's sullen, when he's not playing with the same kind of fire that he usually plays with, it does have an effect on the rest of the team. So the rift with Boudreau was something real. I agree with you. I think he was dogging it. I wouldn't be surprised if now, with a new coach in Dale Hunter, all of a sudden things start turning around for him and for the team. The real question is, can you condemn him if this is the way it had to work out? You know, I thought GM George McPhee said something really interesting yesterday in their press conference about the Dale Hunter hiring, which was, you know, Boudreau was empty. The tank was empty. He was out of tricks. He tried everything. He threw out the fire wagon hockey offensive system and tried something more defensive. This year, he decided to stop being the jovial, cherubic teddy bear and tried to be a disciplinarian. That didn't work. It rang hollow. So I think the change had to be made because the team stopped responding to him, and now it's good. You know, Ovechkin's got blood on his hands. So let's see if this change that he helped instigate winds up giving him a kickstart this season.
Well, what was that game? I think it was a couple weeks ago. They benched him for the last minute when they were down one. They tied the game, and then they won an OT, but people seem to think that was the tipping point for Ovechkin, and he just gave up after that.
Right, and it was one of those situations where at the time I gave Boudreau the benefit of the doubt because all people had been asking for years from this guy when it came to the playoffs and the team's inability to really step up and get past the second round was accountability. You know, take these guys to task. Give guys that work hard the ice time instead of the superstar players if they're not playing effective hockey. And he did just that at the end. It was against the Ducks here in D.C. I was in the building for that game. And he did just that. He gave the grunts and Nick Backstrom a chance to try to tie that game. They did. Ovechkin was back on the ice in overtime for them to eventually win the game. But it was that moment where you said, you know what, finally this guy is trying to come at it with a stern, you know, kind of pimp hand and try to get these guys in line. But I think what the problem with Boudreau was you can't go from being everybody's buddy, being the goofy guy on the local television commercials, and then try to all of a sudden mold and shape yourself into Mike Keenan. It doesn't work. It rings hollow. So they bring in Dale Hunter, who obviously comes in with this incredible reputation as being one of the roughest, toughest, grittiest, nastiest players that's ever played for the Washington Capitals. And it's a clean slate, but a guy who comes in clearly with a mandate to do whatever it takes with these guys to right the ship.
And was a cheap shot artist back in the day. Just throwing that out there.
He was a cheap shot artist, but again, he's one of these guys who you have to remember was also an extraordinarily skilled offensive player. It was really hard to trash a Dale Hunter and a Claude Lemieux as being worthless players because they'd always step up offensively. They had the goods. It's just that they also played on the edge and did some really terrible things. In Lemieux's case, the affair with Chris Draper, and then in Hunter's case, obviously the Turgeon incident against the Islanders. So. But again, it's not to say that the guy is a worthless player. He was a fantastic player, and some argue the fact that he was this perfect balance of offense and over the line physicality actually made him one of the more unique players and almost makes him a Hall of Fame contender.
I loved Linsman brought that to the Bruins for a couple years, and it was great. There's nothing better than having an agitator. Marchand's like that for the Bruins now. He's not on the Linsman Hunter level, but he'll do it from time to time. He'll bug people. And Lucic this year, same thing. For some reason, he's been feisty. Like, I was actually watching the game when he ran Ryan Miller, which it's always one of those dicey things when the guy runs into the goalie like that because they probably could avoid it, but sometimes they're just frustrated and they're like, F it, and they just go right into the guy. And the Sabres never defended him. And, that was one of my favorite games of the year because you knew the next game they have to defend the goalie. That's just
as you know, Bill, Lucic was merely watching the puck. He had no idea Ryan Miller was in front of him.
Yeah.
He kind of accidentally bumped him and some catastrophe happened.
Yeah, of course.
But it just goes to show that, that's you think about the Bruins and the way they were able to win the Stanley Cup last year. They got very fortunate through that run, winning some games in overtime and that kind of thing. They weren't by no means a juggernaut. But then they got to that final against Vancouver, and at some point, it was after the Nathan Horton injury, at some point they just realized we can punch this team in the mouth and we're not getting hit back. And that changed the complexion of the series. And I think they've carried that over, that mindset into this season, where they're the bullies now. And they went ahead and, Lucic runs over Miller. Nobody responds on the Sabres. And then by the time the Sabres actually do, call him on the carpet and try to fight him in the next game, the die's already been cast, as far as them being the team that doesn't respond when their star goalie gets run.
And they had the classic October after you win the Stanley Cup, the famous Stanley Cup hangover that is now so predictable that everybody was predicting it. And then when it's happening, you can't even be surprised. November starts, they win their first couple. The Buffalo game, I feel like was like when they kind of really settled into whatever identity they have now. And now they're just kind of like they're in that FU mode with the entire league. I got to say something though about shootouts, because this is the first regular season I've really thrown myself into since, as I told you by email, 93-94, the Oach Juno Neely glory days. The shootout is really, I don't know what to make of it. Like, on the one hand, it's really exciting. And I do enjoy it, and especially when you're there live and with the seats we have for the Kings games, like right behind the net. Like, it's genuinely exciting. On the other hand, it's a really weird way to lose a game. And, you think of the Friday after Thanksgiving, the Bruins lose to the Red Wings. They have a 10-game winning streak. And granted, a couple of those wins were from shootouts, but they lose the shootout, and there goes the winning streak, and it's like, really? Like, the Bruins played well in that game. Like, it kind of sucked that the winning streak had to end just because one shootout guy was better than the other. Like, where do you stand on the shootout?
Hate it.
Okay.
Hate it. I wrote a book once a couple years back called Glow Pucks and 10-Cent Beer, the 101 Worst Ideas in Sports History. Number one on the list was the shootout.
Oh, well, there you go.
Here's the thing, right? Hockey is, to me, the quintessential team game. It's about the logo on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back. It's all that stuff we always hear about it. And yet we are going to determine who wins or loses 65 minutes of a team game.
Yep.
With a shooter, a goalie, and blind luck in most cases. And the fact that the game can be decided, and let's put it in proper perspective, playoff seeding can be decided by a play that doesn't involve a pass being attempted, on a play that doesn't involve a defenseman anywhere on the ice playing his position. It's maddening to me. It's maddening that the game is reduced to that element to determine the winner or the loser for two reasons: time constraints, You want to get the game in at a certain time and not play marathon games in the regular season, and because people don't like ties.
Yeah.
That was the other thing.
Well,
This was my solution to this thing. Because here's the thing, right? Like, I think you can artificially end a game with some kind of gimmick, but I just want to see the gimmick make it look more like team hockey than this thing. So I thought maybe you trade off power plays, like a 4-on-3 power play. You give the home team the first one if they scored. Maybe do it like a sudden death kind of thing. Like, there's got to be a way to incorporate some teamwork, maybe even 2-on-1 breakaways back and forth instead of just being a guy and a goaltender. Something that incorporates more of the team aspect of hockey, passing, defense, that whole thing, than this shootout thing. Because I got to be honest with you, Phil, as much as the shootout does have its visceral thrills, and let's face it, in some cases is the primary way hockey gets on your fine network, the real issue for me is that I find it boring now. There's a finite number of solutions to a shootout, and I feel like I've seen them all. When you're watching a team hockey game, goals can be scored in a multitude of unpredictable ways. In a shootout, it's a guy with a puck on a stick and a goaltender, and it's going to be one of 12 moves.
And also, and again, this is the first regular season I've really thrown myself into. So the shootout, I'm really, I would jump into the Bruins late March, early April to get ready for the playoffs and acquaint myself with the team because all I cared about was playoff hockey. But now, just watching games in and out, it's really hard to score in a shootout. I wasn't prepared for how difficult it is for these guys to just get the puck by the goalie, and the degree of difficulty is so high. That's another thing. It just seems totally random. As you said, they all have one of 12 moves they're going to use, and then it just basically comes down to whether they got lucky or not with the shot. I don't know.
It's all for entertainment value. I mean, it primarily, and there's no question that people dig it. I mean, I'm a hater. I'm a basher on the shootout, and I know that I'm probably in the minority. But I've always felt like if you want to really make it entertaining, then make it entertaining. Take off the helmets. Let's see their faces. Allow teams to really strategize in the shootout. Add more players to it. Extend it if it's going to be this much fun. Have it be where you can use the same guy over and over again. So, if you're playing the Washington Capitals and Dale Hunter wants to put Ovechkin out there 5 times in a row versus whomever the other team's thrown out there, let him do it. I mean, it just feels like already the gimmickry for me is stale. I'm just not a fan of it. I get so amped for a 4-on-4 overtime for 5 minutes, and then they go to the shootout, and it sucks the air out of me. They tried to do a thing in the summer where they were experimenting with 4-on-4 overtime and then dropping it down to 3-on-3 for about 5 minutes to kind of make it even more wide open and try to create an opportunity to end the game before the shootout. But, I mean, and the other thing about it, obviously, is the standings. I mean, like you said, the shootouts are a way to kind of keep your team in the mix. I'm a Devils fan, obviously, with Berdor. I've been sort of blessed to have a guy who's pretty darn good in the shootout for the last several years, and it's really kind of pumped up my points in the standings. And to me, they're counterfeit. It's one of the biggest reasons why I think people who want to reward 3 points instead of 2 for a regulation victory are onto something, because otherwise, a shootout victory is as valuable as a victory in team hockey for 60 minutes, and that's maddening.
My dad is a big proponent of 4-on-4 for the first 5 minutes, and then you have a little break, second 5-minute period, 3-on-3. And if nobody wins at that point, everybody just goes home.
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to see 3-on-3 work. I went to their developmental camp. The NHL does this real cool thing where they have a bunch of prospects come and they test out a bunch of new rules in August and see what works and see what doesn't. And they tried to do the 3-on-3, and by the time they got around to it, the kids were exhausted, so it was a slog. It was sloppy and icky. But last year, I understand they did it, and it was real fun. There was just up and down. Every shot resulted in an odd man rush the other way. So I'd like to see what it looks like with actual NHL players in there instead of a bunch of prospects. But anything that will end the game before we get to the skills competition to determine the victor is fine by me.
Here's another thing I was thinking. Well, as you said, the 4-on-4 is electric. You can watch a terrible hockey game for 3 periods, and all of a sudden that 4-on-4 overtime will save it for 5 minutes. And it's disappointing when it's over. And also it goes fast because it's almost like there's rarely stoppages, there's rarely penalties. And that 5 minutes can go in a blink of an eye, and you're like, man, that was great. I wish I could have seen more of that. maybe the solution is you cut every period down by 1 minute, and then you leave the door open for 2 5-minute 4-on-4s.
Or just play 2 5-minute 4-on-4s and let it be the 60 standard minutes. I mean, you could get away with that. You could do that. You could play 10 minutes of 4-on-4 hockey. I
agree. I would say though, the only thing is, as somebody who now goes to these games, it's a long night.
It is.
You know, it's a full 3 hours even before you get into the overtime. I took my daughter to one game and it went into overtime and then a shootout. Mm-hmm. And needless to say, she was just totally confused by the shootout. It was impossible to explain. It was just, I gave up. But it was over. It was a 3 hour and 20-minute night. And I think that's probably what their thinking is. I don't agree with it.
Also for television. I mean, they don't want it to be where every local cable network, your local Comcast affiliate, has to block out 5 hours for a hockey game every night because they simply don't know if it's going to go into multiple overtimes and that kind of thing. I mean, the thing about it, though, obviously, is that, like, in the playoffs, it's a rite of passage for a hockey fan to prepare themselves to sit down for 4 hours, 5 hours in case these things go into multiple overtimes. I mean, obviously, in the regular season, we're talking about school nights and that kind of thing. You don't want it to be a marathon. So if we're not going to do ties, and I'm okay by ties. I don't care about ties. I feel like I walk out of a tie game knowing that my team played well, and I'm okay with it. If we're not going to do it, then let's come up with some other artificial way that actually looks like hockey. And the argument is, of course, that this shootout is essentially a penalty shot. But penalty shots happen organically, and this is an artificial way to end the game.
I like the 2 5-minute 4-on-4 periods, and if they're worried about the whole length of the night, then cut down the between periods from 17 minutes to 15, and even chop a minute off each period and go 19 minutes or whatever you need to do. But maybe it's not that big of a deal. It's just the one thing that's jumped out at me. It's such a stupid way to lose a game. I mean, there's no real equivalent in any other sport. In basketball, we don't have a foul shooting contest after the first overtime. You just play until somebody wins.
Yeah, and in baseball, someone made the comparison that it's like a home run derby. I'm like, well, it's more like a pitcher taking on a batter and having no fielders behind him. So as soon as the ball's hit, he has to start running after it.
And the thing is, it's not like it's not exciting. I mean, it's not like somebody's like, oh, the shootout's coming up. I'm just going to go and get a run on getting out of my parking lot. Like, you stay for the shootout. But the 4-on-4 is the single most exciting thing, I think. Other than maybe a 5-on-3 power play or something like that.
The real funny thing about the shootout is that, I mean, it's obviously a joke. It's obviously just a skills competition and a way for us to end the game, right? But people actually try to enforce rules during it. Like when a player whips out a spinorama, and does the whole 360 and shoots the puck, it becomes this moment of controversy as to whether the puck was actually still moving forward as it should be, because the puck always needs to be moving forward. You can't stop the progress of the puck, yada, yada, yada. I'm thinking to myself, I don't care if this guy picks up the puck and throws it at the goalie. If it entertains me, let's just make it Thunderdome. Let's just make it Thunderdome and let anything possible happen in the shootout.
Yeah, or you get like 15 seconds to score from the time you get the puck. So if you miss, you can go get it and come back and get it.
So it's like it's just like the slam dunk competition now.
Yeah, I love it like that.
You blow your chance, you go back and get it. I don't care if the player reaches into the stands and takes the T-shirt cannon and loads it up with the puck and fires it at the goalie's head. Just entertain me.
What would be your move on a shootout?
My move on the shootout would definitely be one of those things that makes the goaltender look stupid, and it's the sort of Pavel Datsyuk move where you're coming in on the goalie and then you kind of bring your stick over to the right and you dangle the puck past the goalie real softly as he's lurching the other way to try to stop the puck. Anything that makes the goaltender look like a flailing moron on your shootout attempt is the thing that I would like to do most.
I like when the guys go wide. I like when they start like all the way over on the right boards and then do the sweeping across thing. I think if I'm the goalie, that's the move I'm most afraid of. Because instead of just being able to cut down the straight-on angle, now I have this guy sweeping across, and I don't know if he's going to shoot right at the beginning of the sweep or he's going to wait to go all the way around. That's what I would do. I like that one.
Well, and again, it's one of those moves that, as like if your goaltender may not be of the greatest health, Like if you're an Islanders fan, you have Rick DiPietro in there, and you see some guy do that move on a shootout. You're worried about his groin exploding and becoming lunar dust.
Well, that's what. So these seats we have for the Kings games are in the second row, right behind the net, and we're the visitors goalie for 2 out of 3 periods. And it is fascinating to watch these goalies, just how they spend their time for 3 hours. It's really like just the amount of it's a little Asperger's-y, to be honest. Like
totally.
the amount of time they have to drink water. Like it's very routine. It's very Rain Man-ish of I have to do this. I have to do my stretch. Now I have to do this. Now I have to hit my stick 3 times. Now I have to get a drink. It's just a weird way to live your life, it seems like.
Goalies are crazy, and they also have to be the most mentally tough players. You know, as a Devils fan, watching Brodeur for the last 20 some odd years or close to it, he used to not face a lot of shots because the Devils defense was kind of stout. They played the trap. They didn't allow a lot of chances. And people would say, hey, you know what, how good is Brodeur really if he's only facing 18 shots a night? And I'm thinking to myself, he's pretty darn good because he's got to keep himself in the game and active, having only faced a shot every few minutes, whereas other goaltenders like Dominik Hasek, for example, would flop and flail like the fish at the end of the Faith No More video and be much more engaged than Brodeur was.
Yeah. Quick last night. Quick has a ceiling that's pretty high. Last night, Quick got into the zone. It just became clear he wasn't giving up a goal. And I think that's another thing that's fun about, in the playoffs we always talk about the hot goalie, but during the regular season you can actually see the goalies sometimes they just get in these little zones. And the Kings made the biggest mistake they made with Quick was I think he was on he hadn't given up a goal in 3 games or something. We went to this game. I forget who they were playing, but they decided to play the other guy. And the fans are kind of bummed out because people are kind of getting into this Quick streak. It's like, he hasn't given up a goal since X number of minutes, and they show up and he's not playing, and it did kind of derail their season a little bit. The Bruins are in the same situation with the Kings where they have 2 good goalies. Does it even make sense to have 2 good goalies?
Today it does, I think, especially because when you enter the postseason, if you lose your guy, then all of a sudden you're trying to piece something together with a backup goalie. Your season's done. I like having 2 strong goaltenders. I like the fact that the Bruins. Oh God, yeah. If the Bruins, if something happens to Tim Thomas, they've got a second option. In Los Angeles, the same thing. And you think about what's happening in Vancouver right now, where Roberto Luongo comes back from that playoff. He has a very inconsistent season, and then all of a sudden his backup goalie Corey Schneider starts playing lights out. And it's less of a controversy now than simply a team winning when it needs to win. And then you worry about that stuff as you get to the playoffs. I mean, I think competition makes for a better goaltender. And there are certain guys in this league, Intiro Niittymaki from the Sharks and a few others, that have a knack for coming in as a backup goaltender and then really kind of pushing the starter to be better, or else he might lose his job. And I think competition for these guys is always a good thing. The thing about Quick, by the way, not to completely turn you into a Jonathan Quick fanboy. Somebody asked me about this last night after a shutout, and I checked it. He's got more shutouts in his first 200 NHL games than Brodeur did. He's got 18. Brodeur had 16.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm already a fanboy. I like Quick. I've obviously I'm a Bruins fan, and I've watched an amazing amount of Bruins games this year. I'm kind of dumbfounded by it, to be honest. But
where does your
Quick.
freak flag fly when the Bruins play the Kings? You're a Bruins guy then?
Oh my God, no question. No question at all.
So you would wear the T-shirt that says, I have 2 favorite teams, the Bruins?
No. The Kings are it's like, let's say you live in some community, like you're living in, where do you live?
I live outside of D.C.
Right. Okay, so you go to the local high school there, and you go to a high school hockey game, and you're rooting for the local team because that's your hometown team, but more because you're happy for everybody else is in the thing. That's where I am with the Kings. I like all the fans that go to the games. They have great fans. And also, just in general, the hockey fans, there's no contest. They're so nice. It's really like you get to know people in your section. They really genuinely care about what's happening. They're not just there because somebody gave them tickets or whatever. They actually really care. They know what's going on. They're smart. And I think that's been my favorite thing about going to the games.
Were you surprised by that in LA?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I knew it was the case with the Bruins, but I always thought maybe the Bruins fans were just, we had the history of, your grandfather was watching the Bruins. It's generations and generations. And I didn't know if that was the way other hockey fans would be. And at least in LA, I can say it is. They're really smart. They stay to the end. They're loyal. They seem like they get it. I like how they're irrational. Like, they hate this guy Penner. on the Kings, they just hate him. And they just – anything he does isn't good enough. They just can't stand him. And I like how it's like – it reminds me of what it was like to go to the Celtic games in the 80s where, the fans were so locked into every single thing that was happening with the team. And, I go to the Clipper games. It's just not like that. 3/4 of the people are just there to be there.
And there's a certain universal language as a hockey fan. Every
Totally.
single team in the league has, like we talked about before, their crap disturber, like a Marchand. Every single team has their goat, like a Penner. I mean, it's funny when we put a question out on Puck Daddy about like who's your biggest goat or who's your biggest disappointment as a signing. Everybody chimes in, and it's not just simply saying a name. It's being convinced with almost religious fervor that their guy is the pinnacle of disappointment compared to your guy. It's a really a wonderful thing.
Well, the guy who's kind of emerging into that for the Bruins is Pouliot, another guy whose name I can't say, number 67. But he seems to be the guy that people just wish would be a little bit better than he is, but it's not nearly on the level of Penner. Penner is like people, if he was a piñata, people would pay to hit him with a baseball bat, I think. That's the level of distaste for him.
Now, I hope it's not a off-season fat joke about Dustin Penner that he's actually filled with candy.
He does.
He kind of got that conditioning knock earlier this year.
He could be in better shape. You mentioned though about how every team has that, certain types of guys. And if anything, like I look at the Kings, not to turn this into a Kings podcast, but they don't have the agitator guy. They have it's kind of like it's a weird team. It's like a finesse team. They don't have an enforcer. They don't have the guy who just bugs the hell out of anybody else. They don't have that that Chara type defenseman that could be out there for 35 minutes. Everybody says Jack Johnson's great. And I've been to, I think, 6 Kings games now. And I don't want to say he's overrated. Maybe he's hurt. I don't know what's going on. But he's not somebody that ever jumps off the ice. The only guy that jumps off the ice when you watch is Kopitar. You watch him and you go, wow, that guy is really good. Like, you could know nothing about hockey and go to a Kings game and go, wow, that guy, he's one of the best 10 players in the league, right? Like, you would just have that. They don't really have anybody else in that level, in my opinion.
I think for the Kings, they've got guys that have latent pest tendencies. Like Mike Richards could be a total pest.
Totally,
and Dustin Brown could be a total pest. And I mean, not a pest. He's a different kind of pest. He's a physical player. He can knock you around a little bit and get you off your game. And they've got a few guys down the lineup that can drop the gloves too. But if I was going to say one guy to be a pest on the Kings, it might be Mike Richards, just by virtue of the fact that I used to watch him torment or attempt to torment at least Sidney Crosby and players like that back when he was the Flyers. Crosby would always kind of get the better of him, but he could definitely be that agitator type if need be.
I haven't seen anybody on the level of Marchand. The guy who just delights in tormenting the other team. And I think that's one of the reasons he's become such a popular Bruin, is he really is a link to the old
And to circle it back to Hunter and Claude Lemieux earlier, I mean, he's the guy who has that quintessential ability to piss you off as a pest and then make you extraordinarily frustrated by scoring. And those guys are the real rarities. I mean, you've got guys in this league that know how to tick you off, but to have them then really kind of rub it in your face by scoring a big goal or making a big offensive play is the real commodity in my eyes.
Well, the reason I brought up that 2-goalie thing is there was a rumor, granted internet rumor, probably not true, but that the Bruins were going to trade Tuukka Rask in a deal to get Rick Nash back. And, it's Rick Nash. Like, you add Rick Nash to this Bruins team, and now you're talking about the best offensive Bruins team since the 71 team, probably.
Well, there's a couple of guys that are sort of on the block right now, or rumored to be on the block. I don't know if Nash will necessarily move, but Nash.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Why would you trade him?
They talk about Bobby Ryan being available from the Ducks.
What about Iginla?
Iginla's a tough one. I think Iginla is kind of to relate it to the Bostonian thing is kind of their Ray Bourque. I mean, I think when he decides it's time to go, he can go. I think there's a lot of politics involved insofar as their general manager, Jay Feaster, in trying to trade Iginla, because I mean you are trading the most popular player in the history of the franchise, and a player that is now up in years. You're never going to get what fans think is equal value, and there's every chance that you're going to wind up trading him into a contender, and then watching him win a Stanley Cup. Like, could you imagine Iginla on the Sharks, Iginla on the Kings, that kind of situation, and now all of a sudden you're talking about the ultimate pain for a hockey fan, which is A, seeing your favorite franchise player traded in the waning days of his career and not retiring in that sweater, and B, seeing him elevated to greatness someplace else, much like Bork in Colorado.
And that was what really hurt hockey in Boston. And I was living in Boston when that happened, but when it reached the point that they had to trade Bork to give him a chance to win a Stanley Cup, that's the ultimate slap in the face. But Calgary's not like – Calgary hasn't hit rock bottom as a franchise, right? I mean, they're not at that level.
They kind of come and go, man. Like, they're in a spot right now where they clearly need to rebuild. They've got some pieces there that are up in age that are movable. Iginla being one, Kiprusoff, the goalie, probably being another. But the team was so mismanaged, and it's just a mishmash of spare parts and overpaid players, and it's one of those deals where you're wondering where to start. You're almost saying to yourself, just tank it, and go into the Pittsburgh Penguins, Washington Capitals rebuilding plan of getting a bunch of first-round picks.
Or Edmonton recently. I mean, Edmonton's last two picks were that worked out about as well as it could have worked out, right?
And exactly. And now Edmonton is arguably the single most entertaining team in the league because they've got a bunch of kids who don't know any better skating up and down the ice and passing to each other.
So, Taylor Hall over Seguin. I mean, it's not Odin Durant or anything like that, but if they have a do-over on that, now I'm saying remove the part this year where now they get the center in the draft who's awesome. They just take that out, just Hall versus Seguin. You give any team that choice, who do they take?
Right now, if you had a choice of the two players, I still think you wind up taking Hall. Like, I still think
really?
Hall, yeah, I kind
How
of
dare you?
Well, no, right now I think that he's kind of shown more as a pro. And I don't mean that to diminish Seguin because he's had a fantastic season. And as a guy who I'm always going to err to taking a center versus a wing, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a center guy. You build from the middle, that kind of thing. I've watched Hall, and Hall just seems like he is he might not even be the best player on his team now that this Nugent Hopkins kid is there, but he's a special player. I'd still give the slight edge to Hall, with the admission that Seguin is a very special player.
I feel like hanging up on you.
Utter blasphemy, huh?
Who's your comp for Hall? Who's his best case scenario guy who's already played comp?
Oh God, I couldn't tell you. I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, it's tough to say what he's going to wind up being. But I mean, in watching him, he's got offensive spark, he's got creativity. I just think he's going to wind up being a real special player for them, especially with Nugent Hopkins as kind of being his center. I mean, we could be seeing. I don't want to say Oates and Hull because I think Hopkins is going to score a hell of a lot more goals than Oates did. But that kind of partnership could be something that blossoms between them.
Wow, that's high praise.
Well, it is high praise, but it's also complete hyperbole because I mean we are talking about a second-year player, so it's like it's really tough to say what he'll wind up being. And again, I don't mean to slight Seguin. I'm a huge Seguin fan. I think he's one of the coolest things to happen to Boston, right? Sports-wise, the fact that they win that trade and win it so emphatically, or at least we think they win the trade. I mean, obviously Kessel's really kind of rallied this year, but if I had to choose, again, I'm leaning towards Hall a little bit.
That's interesting. I love Seguin, and I think Seguin over anything else. And I know the NBA lockout helped, and get going to Kings games has got me back into it. But I really just like watching Seguin. I like watching that line and the Bruins in general, but especially Seguin. And it's always nice to get those guys, second, third year when they aren't who they're gonna be yet, but they're headed to a really, really good place, and you get to kind of watch them figuring it out, and they can kind of smell it. And that's the stage that he's at. And
the big difference between those two when I met him, because I met him at the draft when they were coming up for the first time, it was so much clearer to me that Seguin was the star. Like, he was Hollywood a little bit, and Hall was more of like a subtle kind of, not necessarily reserved, but less of a boisterous personality than Seguin. I mean, Seguin, I remember, said to me when he got to Los Angeles that his goal there was to track down LC from the hills.
Right.
Which is beautiful. And you don't usually get draft picks saying that kind of thing. So, I mean, it was, from a personality standpoint, from a star quality standpoint, I think Sagan's got one up on Hall. But as far as, like, right now, God, I'd still, even with the year that Sagan's had, I'd still kind of lean towards Hall.
I got to say, I mean, he has a chance to own Boston. Brady's, still Brady. And I don't know how many more years he's going to be at the level he's at, but if you're going to pick the up-and-comer who could be the next Brady in Boston, I think Sagan's the best bet. People love him. He's really fun to watch. He has a chance to be certainly the best Bruin since Bork. It's different. When Joe Thornton came in the late 90s and people wanted him to be great, it was like, oh, this would be our next guy. And you could just kind of tell from the get-go something was missing and something wasn't right. Maybe that's part of it had to do with where hockey was at the time, just as a sport or whatever. But it was never like, Thornton never had, I felt like, a stretch where he just started to pull in casual fans and people like that. And that seems like Sagan might have that ability. So it'll be interesting.
I reserve the right to change my pick on a whim because I think they're neck and neck.
Yeah, don't commit yet.
I'm not going to commit. I mean, you've obviously argued a very compelling case, too, and you're almost preaching to the choir as a Sagan fan over here. But I got it.
Well, the one thing with hockey players, because anybody can score goals, whatever, like when you have that passing gene, it really just opens up a game just as a fan watching it because you never know when the guy's going to pull some incredible pass out of his ass. Yeah. And he's one of those rare guys that he sees the ice a little bit differently than everybody else. He just does. And, especially if it's like a 5-on-3 or 5-on-4, I feel like he's going to find some weird angle that I'm not even seeing as I'm watching it, And that's when it gets – to me, I love passing in basketball, anything. So,
well, that's why, I mean, Sidney Crosby being one of the more divisive athletes in professional sports is fascinating to watch because it's like he's got sonar out there. I mean, the passes he makes, just sensing what's going to happen, sensing how a play is going to develop. He's got that ability, and it's inherent. I mean, it's not taught. He's a guy who works harder than most, but that bit of it is genetic or something. Chemical.
And the Twins in Vancouver have that obviously, and it's not something you only see once every 10 years. You'll have at any given point there'll be 4, 5, 6 guys who have it, but it's been fun to watch. I forgot to ask you this about Ovechkin. He's not even in the top 40 in points right now, and what would be the equivalent of that in the NBA or like in football or something? Like for him, the talent that he has, for him not to be in the top 40 of points, what does that mean?
It means that he's had a terrible season for a guy who I think a lot of us thought was going to bounce back and challenge for the goal-scoring title and challenge for the point title.
But beyond terrible, though, right? I mean, that's like almost like fishy terrible.
Yeah, when you can start naming off not only guys around the league that are like second and third liners that have more goals than he does, but also guys in his own team like Jason Chimera, having more goals than he has. It's kind of embarrassing, and I think it speaks, like we said before, to the whole notion of
to the coach,
the coach and the rift, and now maybe he turns it around. But there's so many other things at play with Ovechkin that it's hard to really pin down one thing. Like this guy Kirk Muller just got hired as the coach in Carolina, and he's credited with coming up with the book on Ovechkin. Basically, he came up with a way to defend him in a playoff series between Montreal and Washington when he was an assistant in Montreal. And you ask around the league, and that approach has been replicated by a lot of other teams. Taking away Ovechkin's space, forcing him to the outside, not giving him any shooting lanes on the power play. All these things have been kind of replicated by other teams, and it's been effective. But the other thing about Ovi that's kind of tougher to nail down is the psychological thing, where you're wondering, with all of the playoff disappointment, with the disappointment in the Olympics, with the Russians. I mean, it doesn't matter what this guy does in the regular season, or so that he's told. It all depends on what you do in the playoffs, because Sidney Crosby has a Stanley Cup and other guys have a Stanley Cup. He's not one. He's never even played for one. And I think that really kind of affected him at some point to where, dominating and scoring 65 goals in the regular season no longer meant as much to him as it used to, because he knows it all depends on what he does statistically and what his team does in the win-loss column come May.
Well, I mean, is it inconceivable that they would trade him?
I think it is inconceivable that they'd trade him. He is the franchise player. He's got the contract of a franchise player. He's the catalyst for the entire Rock the Red fan movement that's filled the seats there in a way they've never been filled before. It would be the most one of the more stunning develop. I mean, not to again traffic in hyperbole, but to see him traded would be kind of Gretzky leaving Edmonton for a lot of people in DC. I mean, I think they assume that he's going to be here for the duration of his career.
Right.
The interesting thing about Ovechkin and his place in the franchise, Dale Hunter comes in as a new coach, and they have a big press conference. They're asking George McPhee, the GM, all these questions. They get around to Ovechkin, and McPhee is protecting him. He's trying to say he didn't cause the Boudreau to get fired and this, that, and the other thing. Someone asks McPhee, so if Dale Hunter, who obviously was a captain in the NHL and a pretty darn good one, Dale Hunter decides he wants to make a change in the captaincy, okay, for the Washington Capitals, and take the C off of Ovechkin. So what happens? And McPhee says, well, that's not going to happen. So a new coach comes in. He has carte blanche to do whatever he wants with this lineup to try to turn this team around. But don't go taking the captaincy away from Alex Ovechkin is an edict handed down before this guy has even coached a game. So that gives you a sense of the importance of Ovechkin to that franchise.
All right, let's go quick because you got to go. Crosby, from what you've seen so far, give me a percentage from 50% to 100% of him being back to where he was before. Hard to argue with 100% because, I mean, he's scoring goals, he's seeing the ice, he's getting into physical battles, and he elbowed Nick Foligno in the jaw the other day and caused a big stir. He wasn't going to come back until he felt 100%, and I have a feeling that he felt 100%, and that's why he's back. He's been remarkable, and for a hockey fan, whether you love Sid or hate Sid, and I think I compare him to Brady, I compare him to Kanye West as players as people of undoubted genius that people sometimes like or hate. To have that moment where he comes back from the injury and have the whole hockey world watching it, and for one of those rare occasions where the individual rises above the team and it's all about him, and then he delivers. It was one of the more remarkable nights, I think, in the last couple of years for hockey. Why does it seem like there's so many teams bunched in that 2 games over 500, 500, 1 game under? Why is most of the league like that right now?
Well, because the salary cap kind of helps spread talent out. It also kind of breeds mediocrity, and the way that the points are given out for overtime losses and shootout wins and that kind of thing allows some mediocre teams to kind of hang tight longer than they normally would. But the other thing about it, obviously, is the fact that you got teams like Ottawa and Toronto and Minnesota that a lot of people didn't think would be as good as they are this year, jumping up to the top of the standings, and you have other teams like Tampa and Vancouver that are kind of hanging back right now and just sort of stalking the field, to use a horse racing term.
Are you buying or selling Toronto?
I'm buying, especially because they've been able to maintain this with James Reimer, their goalie, on the shelf. And I'm buying because, like everybody else, I was waiting for Kessel to fall apart in November because he usually does, and he played through it, and he's been very good. And I really think that he's turned the corner. Last year, watching the Bruins win the Stanley Cup and being the last kid picked for kickball at the All-Star game, I think really kind of changed him. And he came back, and he has been on fire and aggressive and effective, and I think he's turned the corner.
Explain the Minnesota Wild leading their division in less than 30 seconds.
You were aficionado of the neutral zone trap, and they were playing it. Mike Yeo, the coach, used to be an assistant for the Penguins, came up from the AHL, took over that team. They abandoned the trap for 2 years under Todd Richards. They're playing it again now. And he's shameless about it. He just outwardly says, yeah, we're trapping, and I think there's something really courageous about that in today's climate. Because all these teams trap, Bill. They just don't like talking about it, but he's coming out and saying, you know what, we're playing the trap, and look at us, hey, we're at the top of the standings.
If you, at gunpoint, who are you picking to win the Cup right now?
I picked, my final was San Jose and Pittsburgh. I'm feeling pretty confident about both of those picks. My Cup winner was San Jose. I'll stick with it. I think they'll wind up making some kind of a trade that bolsters that group, and I think it's a pretty good group to begin with.
I saw San Jose last night. I disagree with you, Puck Daddy.
Well, they're not playing good hockey right now, Bill, but I think down the line they'll get their acting gear. Last year in the playoffs, sir, who can forget Joe Thornton's heroism against the Los Angeles Kings?
Oh, is that what we're calling it? I don't know if I like their goalie that I watched last night. He was a little bit shaky, just a tiny bit. Little bit, I don't know, a little jittery.
They are sharks. They are creatures of they're bloodthirsty creatures with their eyes on the prize there.
Well, I am hoping the Bees have one trade in them because I think that the Bees are close. Very, very close.
You think so?
And I do think it's the deepest offensive team they've had. And, if you're trying to pick apart the team, you'd be nitpicking. You'd be like, we could do better than Joe Corvo. You'd be saying things like that. They're in pretty good shape.
It's a bold statement saying you could do better than Joe Corvo.
I want a piece of the Pens.
You might have to go through them to get there. They are the best team in hockey. I mean, with Sid healthy and him back, they're the best team in hockey. The Pens fans have put a little asterisk next to our Stanley Cup last year and said that we only won because we didn't go through them. And well, as a Devils fan, I've learned not to pay attention to asterisks because we have one because we won a cup in half a season. So I just don't pay attention to that stuff anymore.
Hey, you take it. All right, we will check out your fantastic Puck Daddy blog. And by the way, note of appreciation. I love the Russian thug team and the YouTube love you've been giving them over the course of the season.
They just changed the rules, by the way, today, where they're going to try to limit the number of goons that are on KHL rosters because this team has been so efficient in beating up everybody. But for a while, it was fun. It's Vityaz Chekhov, if you want to check out on YouTube. And also, I must drop a quick promo. The Merrick versus Wyshynski hockey podcast is 2 to 3 every day on Puck Daddy and on Sportsnet.ca.
Beautiful. All right. Keep up the good work. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome, sir.
All right. You know what? We went so long with Greg that we're going to have to drag this to a part 2. I'm going to call my buddy House. We're going to talk a little bit of hockey, but we're mostly going to talk about the end of the NBA lockout and maybe make a couple predictions for what's going to happen these next 3 weeks. Stay tuned for that. Part 2 of today's BS Report on PodCenter, iTunes, or Grantland.com. Thanks.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at PodCenter at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.